Good evening and welcome to Domination Submission Radio. My name is Mike Mackay, and I am your host with the most BDSM, DS, kink, and fetish talk on Blog Talk Radio. We have a great show for you tonight. The topic is Online BDSM Relationships. It is a call-in show, so if you have some thoughts you'd like to share on this topic, then I heartily recommend that you call in and talk to us. The number is 347-857-1862. Write it down. Call me, 347-857-1862. You have some opinions on this topic, so why don't you share them with the rest of us? You can also participate in the show by checking out our chat room. If you're listening to us live on Blog Talk Radio, then scroll to the bottom of the page and you should see our chat room there. If you are registered with a free account at Blog Talk Radio, that means you can go into the chat room and say whatever you want, and we'll all be able to see whatever you type. And that's a good way to ask questions as well. If you're a little shy about calling in, then you can ask us in the chat room, and we'll try to answer your question live on the air. So, my co-host tonight is L.B. Shaw, the author of the TV series of ebooks and the author of upcoming BDSM ebook called Becoming Stone. How are you doing tonight, L.B.?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Awesome. I'm muddling through. I'm going to make it, I think. So what do you think of this topic, anyway?
Well, it seems that the Internet is a part of, pervades every area of our lives, so why not relationships too? And honestly, it seems like everyone I know either has their own story or they know someone with a story. And so I have a close friend who, incidentally, she lives in Florida, but when we lived in North Carolina together, we worked together, and she met her current husband in a chat room. And this was back in the 90s when chat rooms were probably fairly new, and I think people probably didn't have a lot of the didn't have a big understanding of how to be careful and that sort of, common sense rules most of the time, but still they met and they're still married and very, very happy, so nice having them there. But yeah.
There are a lot of success stories when it comes to this sort of thing, but there's an awful lot of fad stories as well, and we'll probably hit up a few of those tonight. And some of the things we're going to be talking about, just to give our listeners a chance to kind of mull it over and think about calling in with their questions or their comments. Some of the things we're going to talk about are the different types of online BDSM or DS relationships. There really are a lot of different kinds, and you don't really give it much thought. You just think, well, online, internet, that means the same thing to everybody, but it really doesn't. We'll be talking about some of the pros and cons of online BDSM relationships and maybe the differences between just online relationships or online dating versus online BDSM relationships. And there's a big difference there. And maybe some of the challenges. Maybe we'll tell a few funny stories. I know I've got a couple, and I write about this pretty extensively in my book, so we've got a lot of material to touch upon. And I guess this is where I put in my crass self-promotion and announced that my book will be out in about 2 weeks. It's done in submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook. It'll be available in paperback on Amazon.com and shortly thereafter in ebook form on Smashwords and Kindle. So this topic has got a ton of things that we can talk about. We'll even talk a little bit about how to spot a phony, maybe, and some danger signs. So some great stuff. So we will take your calls. If you are listening tonight and you have a story to tell us, or you've got an opinion that you'd like to hear, or even just a question, then call us. It's 347-857-1862, and we'll be back in just 1 minute. And that was Lighthouse by the Waits, an Australian group. All right, so, LD, have you ever had an online relationship?
I don't know if I've had an online relationship, but I've done plenty of online dating. I don't think that's necessarily the same thing as where you're headed tonight, but I've certainly had plenty of opportunities to screen out the weirdos and the phonies, as you say. So, yes.
Yeah, I think there is a big difference between online dating and online relationships, and I'm not sure that it's a very distinct line, but I think there is a difference. I believe that the difference is exactly what you just said. If you're online dating, you're kind of screening people with the express intent of meeting them in real life and having a real life relationship with this person. Whereas a lot of these online relationships exist only in the cyber realm, and really quite often there's no intention of ever taking it in real life. But, that has its own dangers, because sometimes you go into these things thinking, okay, I'm just playing around, we're never going to meet, so it really doesn't matter what I say or do. And before you know it, you're in deep, head over heels in love. Yeah. And now it matters, all those things that you said and did before, So it can be kind of complicated. I've got to admit, I'll be honest right up front. I've had some online relationships. I've had some very good online relationships, and I've had a few that have turned into very long and fulfilling real-world relationships. So, but then a great many of them did not. So I have mixed feelings about this thing. And to be honest, I don't know if my bias is coming through as we go through the show. If it sounds like I'm being awfully biased one way or the other, just jump in and slap me or something. Well, don't do that. It can be, but it's kind of hard. It really is hard to talk about something like this if you have had a lot of experience with it, and some of them really good ones and some of them really bad. So my biases will probably come out in that regard. What we're going to do is I'm going to play something really quick here for the audience. This is really a clip from Dr. Phil, and he's really talking about online relationships, love scams, and that sort of thing. So this is really not necessarily about BDSM relationships, online BDSM relationships, but most of what he talks about here applies equally across the board to any kind of online relationships, BDSM included. So let me play this, and I'll get your reaction to it when it's done, LB.
We did have phone sex. I did enjoy it. Oh, God. I'm embarrassed to say it.
I do know that my mom sent David pictures of herself in risque clothing. Not normal behavior for a 60-year-old woman. It is sickening, and I do believe that my mom is being exploited. The fact that my mom wires the money to someone's name other than David Wilson tells me that his name's not David Wilson. I did Google one of the names that money got wired to, and the first thing that came up on Google was romance scam. I printed it and gave it to her. Unfortunately, that is not enough to convince my mom that the whole thing was a scam.
We're talking to Dawn, who says she is in love with and has had phone sex with a man she has never seen or spoken to in person. Look, we did some digging here. We found the following website links in which David's image and even his name was mentioned. This one is called Pigbusters. It has to do with scammers awareness. And you see his picture down here?
Yes.
This is actually who this is. This is who you're talking to. This is the Nigerian. The verified location for this is the address.
Yeah.
You can trace this back through service providers, through the internet, and the verified location there is Nigeria, and the user is this guy.
Yeah, I believe you. I believe.
Here's this same picture. This is him, right? This is your secret agent, man?
Right.
It's Chris Dante on yahoo.com. And that's not his name either. This is his other identity where he's working other women. Have I made my case?
You have made your case. I believe he's a scammer. I believe he is.
Dr. Phil, she has spent the last 7 months of her life completely wrapped up in this man.
And I have felt good. Most of the time I have felt good. After I talk to him, I feel really good. He makes me feel good. But he's not him.
Here's the tragedy of all of this, okay? First off, Can I be very real with you here?
Yes, please.
Your 30 grand, gone.
Oh, I know that.
One of the first questions I ask you is, what do you stand to lose if, in fact, this is a scam? And you said, I'll be brokenhearted.
So just to clarify, this woman was in an online relationship for 7 months with a guy who told her that he was a secret agent, that he was traveling the world. Then he got into trouble, and she had to bail him out, and she sent him $30,000. And now she learns on the Dr. Phil show that the guy is a Nigerian scammer who does this for a living. That's all he does, is scam women online. What are your reactions to that, LB?
Well, I've heard of stuff like that happening, but I think it's just an indication of how powerful these relationships can be. And it's real easy to stand in judgment and say, well, that's just stupid. And I mean, it is, obviously it's stupid, but we make choices sometimes that are really, really bad choices based on our emotions. And I think that I personally feel that these online relationships can be like a drug, because you've got, I think when you have two elements, you've got the element of distance and you've got the element of desire, and that can be really, really powerful. So I think it's sad that she was taken advantage of, but you have to be careful because you don't know who you're dealing with. And I think that you need to have a very clear understanding. If you're looking for an online or long-distance relationship like that, you need to be very clear about what it is that you're wanting to get out of that relationship. I understand that sometimes these relationships just happen and when you're not looking for them, but I think you need to go in with a very clear head and know from the start, that make a decision from the start what you're willing to do and how long you're willing to wait before you meet them, or how, that kind of stuff just pops off the top of my head anyway.
Absolutely. Well, in this particular case, this woman had done that. She knew exactly what she wanted out of this relationship. In fact, you heard her say, he makes me feel really good. And that's what she wanted out of the relationship. She wanted those endorphins pumping through her body, those hormones, that good feeling that you get when you are wrapped up in somebody. But, this lady was in a vanilla online relationship. Now imagine how much more potential there is for problems if it's a DS or BDSM relationship. It can really escalate out of control, and it just presents so many opportunities for things to go wrong, both intentionally and unintentionally. And I think a lot of that is the dynamic, and in a DS dynamic especially, you have this requirement for absolute trust. And so you trust someone absolutely, and if that person isn't deserving of trust, that can be a problem, don't you think?
I think so. And I was kind of plundering around the internet looking for, kind of researching this stuff. And I do check other people's blogs. I read blogs of dominants and submissives. And I came across a blog of a dominant who is in an online relationship with a submissive. But interestingly enough, she contacted him initially to ask him some questions just about the DS lifestyle in general. So they corresponded for a few weeks, and then they started emailing, texting, whatever, every day, and they found that they actually liked each other. And so after a few weeks of that, they decided to, I guess a month into it, they decided to reveal to each other their identities and their location. And after a month of heavy correspondence and webcamming and that sort of thing, she actually knelt, and I'm guessing she did this on camera, she knelt for him and asked him to accept her as his submissive. And he did, and I think at that point they met. But I was really shocked to read that someone would make the decision to do that without meeting someone in person, because how can you really know who you're dealing with? How can you really know what do they like with other people? But
right. Well, there are ways, and we'll talk about some of those. And like I said, I have some experiences of my own that I'll be sharing, and I'll share one right now. I met somebody in an online game, very much like World of Warcraft, one of those types of games, and I met somebody in the game, and we almost immediately hit it off in terms of just friendship, but there was a certain chemistry there, and as we got to know each other in the game better and better, I kind of revealed that side of my life, my lifestyle, and she was very fascinated by it. And so we became very close within the game, but also outside of the game in chat programs like Skype and that sort of thing. And we probably continued to talk to each other and talk on the phone and have video chats and that sort of thing for about 4 months, almost daily for about 4 months before we decided to take it beyond an online thing and actually meet in public. And so I actually got on a plane and flew to North Carolina to meet her. And we had a great 3 days together in North Carolina, and that gave us a good chance to verify that the person that we thought we knew online is actually a real person. And I collared her then. When I met her in real life, I collared her, and then I went back home. But we were both in very dire financial straits, and we had a lot of other things going on that we had to take care of. And
so in the end, it really turned out to be over a year before we were able to take the next logical step, which was for her to quit her job, sell her house, load up a truck, and move to Texas to be with me. So from beginning to end, we're talking about almost 18 months before we took the relationship to a real-world 24/7 type of DS relationship. And it worked out pretty well. The relationship lasted for over 6 years, which in the grand scheme of things is pretty darn good considering. So yeah, these things can work out. They don't always. In fact, your odds are pretty slim, but they can work out if you do it right. You're listening to DS Radio. I'm Mike Mackay. My co-host is LB Shaw. We'll be right back.
show where the lady was scammed by some guy in Nigeria and ended up wiring him $30,000. If that can happen in a vanilla relationship, imagine what can happen in a DS relationship that's based on total trust, total power exchange. The possibilities for abuse are endless. In fact, I would probably be remiss if I didn't mention the case of John Edward Robinson. This is a guy who used to hang out in chat rooms, BDSM chat rooms, looking for vulnerable women.
He called himself Slave Master.
And he looked for a specific type of woman, usually women who were vulnerable, who didn't have a wide circle of friends, maybe who were interested in taking the relationship beyond just being an online relationship and taking it into the real world. And so he developed these relationships over time with these women and eventually convinced them to come visit him or come move in with him. And over the course of about 10 years, he met these women, and usually within just a few hours of meeting them for the very first time, he would bash their skulls in with a hammer and murder them, and then continue to cash their Social Security checks, alimony checks, paychecks, whatever kind of income that they were getting, he would continue to cash their checks for years and years. And for all we know, he's done this to dozens of women. We know for a fact that he murdered at least 11 women in this fashion, including one woman who took her teenage daughter along to be murdered with her. So, yeah, this can be very, very dangerous. And, in fact, John Edward Robinson is considered to be the very first online serial killer. So, yeah, it can be dangerous, very dangerous. So we're going to take another quick break, and we'll be back in about 60 seconds to talk about some of the other challenges of these types of relationships, some of the pros and cons, and maybe how you can spot some danger signals or phonage to ensure that you don't become a victim. This is Mike Mackay. You're listening to Domination and Submission Radio. We'll be right back. co-host LB Shaw is back in studio. Glad you could make it back, LB.
Thank you.
Technical difficulties sometimes happen. We'll try to keep that from happening in the future, and maybe we'll have to come back to this topic in a future show to make up for the lost time. But I was just telling a story about the two middle-aged balding guys who each thought the other was a young, sexy girl, teenager, and fell in love with each other. It's pretty ironic, I think.
So are you going to repeat the story so I can hear it?
No, I'll have to tell you after the show.
Kidding.
So we talked a little bit about the different venues, the online venues that you can end up finding yourself in if you are looking at these types of relationships. And I think maybe we need to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of online BDSM relationships. You can tell me what you think about some of these as we go through them. I think one of the real pros, one of the real benefits of an online BDSM relationship is the anonymity. I mean, this is a double-edged sword, but it's the anonymity. I mean, it allows you to try this out without your name on it, without your boss finding out about it, without putting yourself and your professional reputation at risk. What do you think, LB?
Well, I was going to make that point as well. It is sort of a two-sided thing because I think a lot of people will feel safe hiding behind the screen and behind that anonymity and maybe even feel like they can be more honest and kind of let it all hang out. But then others might hide who they really are and only put their best foot forward and be very deceptive about their true nature. So, yeah, it's definitely could go either way, I think.
Yeah, the drawback, of course, is that anonymity does more than make you brave. It also can mask an awful lot of bad intent and incompetence and predatory behavior, whatever. I mean, it can mask a lot of bad behavior. Now, here's another one, another pro, I guess, and it gives you a chance to try it before you buy it. You know, you can dip your toe into the world of BDSM just to find out if you like it without putting yourself at risk. What do you think?
I think that's possible. I don't know how much you can really experience that online. hard to say. I think you might be able to learn some things about it, but I think to really understand the nature of that, it's probably more important to experience it. And I think that kind of leads into where it could be disadvantageous for new people because it might alter their perception or make their perception of what real life submission and domination is. You know, it could make it kind of skewed if they're not familiar with it. That's just my thought.
Well, you know, this happened on a grand scale over the last couple of decades. I don't know if you're very familiar with the entire Gorian lifestyle. This is a DS lifestyle based on the novels of John Norman, who wrote about 33 pulp fiction books about the planet Gore, where all women basically are sex slaves, not all women, but at least for the purpose of the book. And, of course, this whole sci-fi environment or this whole sci-fi fandom kind of spilled over onto the internet and allowed an awful lot of teenage kids who had gotten bored with Dungeons and Dragons to suddenly leap headlong into the Gorian lifestyle. And suddenly they were Gorian masters, and they had a stable of slave women who had to do anything and under penalty of death, just crazy stuff. But the problem is, you know, most of these guys were 13 years old, 15 years old, and they were so into it that they suckered in an awful lot of earnest women who really were looking to learn something about the DS lifestyle or the BDSM lifestyle. You know, here's a 45-year-old woman who said, you know, I've led a boring life. I want to learn something about this. So she goes online, she gets into a chat room, and suddenly she's chatting with a Gorian slave master and collared and becomes his virtual slave. Well, you know, she may never learn that he's a 13-year-old guy.
Exactly.
Here's a 45-year-old woman who's a slave to a 14-year-old or something. And what happened was we ended up with an entire generation of people who believe that these master-slave relationships are horrible. Why? Not because they're inherently horrible. The only face of it that was ever presented was by these Dungeons and Dragons teenagers in the basement of their mother's house enslaving women online. And it's no wonder that you even mention the word gore to people these days, and they just look at you like, you know, you're lucky if they don't spit and stomp or whatever people do when they're disgusted.
I'm familiar with have not read any of those books. I'm familiar with them and read about them, but I'm not familiar with that whole trend of the teenagers participating in that sort of thing. But it just goes back to what are you doing? I mean, what are you doing if you're in an online relationship? What is your purpose? What are you wanting to get out of it? And I think you have to be really, really careful about what type of activity you engage in. There's no way around it.
Definitely. Well, here's some of the other downsides of online BDSM relationships is something that I just hinted at right there, is there's an awful lot of kids playing around with it, and they don't have any concept of just how serious it can be. You know, I mean, I told the story about John Edward Robinson, who murdered 11 women, including a woman and her teenage daughter, who thought that they were going to live happily ever after in a DS relationship with a guy who was voted businessman of the year by some group in Kansas City or something. For all they knew, they were going off to live happily ever after and ended up in 55-gallon drums. So, yeah, it's very dangerous, particularly for these young teens who have no idea how much trouble they can get into.
Yeah.
I spoke with one young lady. First of all, I was very surprised to learn that she was a teenager. I mean, she lied about her age on her online profile, and she eventually admitted to me that she was underage. And she was involved with a dominant, and she at some point got frustrated with him and told him to piss off and called him a few choice names, and she thought that was very funny. And I explained to her, I said, do you have any idea how dangerous that is? Any idea? And she said, well, there's no way he can find me. And I just looked at her, and I said, you know, it's thinking like that. I said, you know, what if he showed up at your front door tomorrow with a shotgun? How are you going to explain that to mom and dad? And she literally would not believe me until I said, all right, let me just show you how easy this is. With her IP address, I was able to tell her hometown. With her profile picture, I was able to pull out the exit data and even tell her what brand of camera the picture was taken with. A lot of those pictures have embedded latitude and longitude data there so that you could literally zoom right in on their house using Google Earth. You can run a backwards search on any images, pictures, using TinEye or Google. So, yeah, you may have stripped all the information you can off of your profile picture, but guess what? That picture's also in 5 other places on the Internet, including your Facebook page. Now I have your real name, your real hometown. I've got pictures of your mom and dad and brothers and sisters and your cat.
Yeah.
This is really dangerous. I mean, it's really easy to track people down if you really want to. And I think I scared the crap out of her, but it was a valuable lesson.
Yeah.
In that, you know, if I had been that guy, you'd have to be worried about that guy showing up at your front door with a club or a gun or something.
Right.
So it's very, very scary.
Parents need to watch what their kids are.
Well, yeah, but you know, you can't. You can't. Unless you're willing to read every phone text message and look over their shoulder 24/7, you really can't. And we shouldn't have to change the entire lifestyle to accommodate the fact that kids might find their way into it somehow. I think people just have to behave responsibly is really the bottom line. I mean, you just no way that you can avoid what happens.
Teenagers don't behave responsibly, though, unfortunately. That's the scary truth. But, yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
We don't have a whole lot of time, but let's talk real quickly about how you can spot somebody who is not being honest with you. And, you know, there's a lot of different definitions of what makes a phony when it comes to online relationships. You know, no one expects people to give out their real names and phone numbers and addresses to everybody or anybody for that matter. I mean, it's an exceptionally dangerous thing to do. However, in my book, a phony is somebody who misrepresents his knowledge or his experience or his ability to be in one of these relationships. Does that sound like a good definition to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's important to spot other problem things, not just whether or not they're being phony, but I think you look for consistency. If they're saying things that are inconsistent or acting somewhat inconsistent, then that would be the first thing. And, of course, what do they talk about and that sort of thing.
Most phonies are incredibly indiscriminating. And by that I mean they don't really care who you are, what your qualifications are, what your knowledge level is. They basically walk into a room and says, "Who wants to be my slave?" Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's your first clue right there that this guy, whoever, guy, girl, it doesn't really matter. That's your first clue that this person is a phony. Because real people with real concerns who are really worried about relationships that really work don't just walk into a room and say, "Who wants to be my slave?"
Yeah.
Because this is someone who's obviously drunk on the very idea of having a slave. I think also people who are just completely unfamiliar with the terms and concepts and protocols that are pretty common in the lifestyle. And the trick is not to spoon feed them these terms and concepts and protocols. The trick is to ask open-ended questions that force them to reveal their ignorance if they are ignorant about the lifestyle. And so most phonies are. So the bottom line is to have a healthy level of skepticism. I realize I'm sounding very negative here, and trust me, I believe that online BDSM relationships can work, but the odds are against it. I have some statistics that come out of my book. In online relationships, there's a 80% chance, 81% chance that people are lying about significant things on their profiles. So 8 out of 10 people are lying about some very significant things like their gender, their location, their sex, their financial status, those sorts of things. 4% of vanilla relationships that start online have a chance of lasting 2 years or more. And so when you extrapolate that to BDSM online relationships, that number is probably closer to 2%. So you have about a 1 in 50 chance for BDSM online relationship lasting for 2 years. And there's good news, and that is if you're between the ages of 40 and 69, then you are 56% more likely to have a relationship that lasts 2 years or more. But that's 50% more likely of that 2%. So that probably makes it about a 3% chance. Yeah, it's pretty depressing. So I guess the advice I would have for anybody is if you're looking at pursuing an online BDSM relationship, make sure you know where you're going. Make sure that you are maintaining a healthy attitude of skepticism and have an idea of how you're going to get to where you want to go. Because if you want this thing to go to a real-life relationship, then you got to have a plan, and you got to take some positive steps. And that's the only way it's ever going to happen. Any final thoughts, Toby?
Yes, two. First of all, I think one of the best things that I read just in my research that I did was that I guess if you want a better chance of having a long-term, healthy online relationship, it should start out as a vanilla. You should be able to talk about vanilla things. You should have a genuine interest in wanting to get to know the other person. And, of course, the other thing that I read was that these relationships typically work better if they're a hybrid of an online and real life. So maybe that's just food for thought anyway.
Absolutely. You've been listening to Domination Submission Radio. I'm Mike Mackay. My co-host is L.B. Shaw. We've been talking about online BDSM relationships. I hope you've gotten something out of it. We'll try and hit this topic again in a future show since we lost a little time due to technical issues this evening. But I hope you'll tune in next week for more Domination and Submission Radio.
Good night.
Bye-bye now.